Hey, good people. Welcome to the Evolving Education Project podcast, hosted by me, Dr. Tiffany M. Niachai, and friends, where we center the educational joys, passions, interests, and inquiries of people of color. This is episode 24. Coming up is a conversation about the book that was the biggest inspiration for creating this podcast, a podcast that centers communities of color only. The authors and I discuss how different communities of color have resisted erasure from U.S. curriculum and the importance of recovering and synthesizing these histories in ways that are decolonial and outside the white gaze. We would like to begin by shouting out the cities of our newest listeners. We have new listeners in Rochester, New York, Boston, Massachusetts, Washington, D.C., and St. Louis, Missouri. Our audience is growing, y'all, still. And we know it's because of word of mouth. Thank you. We appreciate y'all for pressing play and listening in your car, at the gym, on your walk, wherever. Please continue to share this podcast with others. I also appreciate everyone who stops me to tell me how much they are enjoying this podcast when I am out and about in the world. It's so encouraging. You have no idea. What would also help is if everyone listening can take 1 minute to write an Apple review. Even if it's just 5 words, it will help us out so much. And we will shout you out on the show when you do. Yes. This episode is the author's interview. Part 2 of our Honoring Communities of Color Knowledges and Cultural Practices series. To start from the beginning of the series, go to episode 23 and listen all the way through. We don't want you to miss any part of this powerful series. Today, we will be interviewing our inspiration for the series, Drs. Wayne Au and Dolores Calderon, 2 of the 3 authors of the book, Reclaiming the Multicultural Roots of U.S. Curriculum, Communities of Color, and Official Knowledge in Education. Dr. Wayne Au is an educator, activist, and scholar who focuses on issues of race, class, and power in schooling, and a proud product of Seattle Public Schools. He is professor in the School of Educational Studies at the University of Washington, Bothell, where he currently serves as Dean of Diversity and Equity. An old school hip-hop head and retired DJ, Au is an editor of the social justice teacher magazine, Rethinking Schools, and the author and editor of numerous other publications, including Teaching for Black Lives, Rethinking Ethnic Studies, and A Marxist Education, Learning to Change the World. Dolores Calderon is professor of Youth, Society, and Justice at Western Washington University's Fairhaven College of Interdisciplinary Studies. As a researcher who embodies the complicated subjectivities of U.S.-Mexico border, Mexican, settler arrivant, indigenous, Pueblo, and U.S. citizen, she is interested in researching and participating in work that untangles and unpacks the complicated ways multiple colonialisms impact decolonial thinking and practices, specifically in educational curriculum. As a former social studies teacher and educational outreach worker, her areas of study include critical indigenous studies in education, curriculum, multicultural education, and epistemology in education. She has published in various academic journals such as Qualitative Inquiry, Harvard Educational Review, and Anthropology and Education Quarterly. In their award-winning book, Reclaiming the Multicultural Roots of U.S. Curriculum, Communities of Color, and Official Knowledge in Education, Wayne Au, Anthony Brown, and Dolores Calderon critique and disrupt the curriculum canon that seeks to uphold white male histories as well as their versions of racialized others within or absent from those histories. They explicitly detail the fight for structural and curricular inclusion in schools and self-determination among communities of color marginalized by race, ethnicity, culture, indigeneity, language, and/or immigration status in the U.S. In doing so, they reveal the ways in which communities of color have always been concerned about the educational experiences of their children. I quote them here. Communities of color considered and struggled over just what kind of curriculum they thought was best for their children. The authors describe how Native American communities resisted the colonial curriculum imposed upon them and fought for tribal sovereignty. Chinese American and Japanese American communities worried about their children's transnational linguistic and cultural memories, never knowing when the U.S. would ask them to, quote, go back home. Mexican Americans fought against U.S. curriculum violence that excluded their histories of stolen land. And I quote, The politics of Reconstruction for African Americans has been about revising and repudiating the existing images of Black personhood while also filling the void left by histories and stories that have not been told. This interview was originally recorded in the fall of 2021, but it is still very relevant. And this is our last 2021 recording. Yay, we made it. All other episodes in this series were recorded within the last couple of weeks. Okay, let's listen in on this conversation. So thank y'all so much for me like not emailing back for 2 weeks and 3 weeks. I was just like, and y'all was like, no, we good, we still coming. I was like, y'all still gonna come? Can they still do it? So I'm glad that y'all are here. And I'm gonna just fangirl a little bit because I have to tell you so much about what this book has meant in my life. And after I thought about it, I really think this, like, I started to like reflect, and I was like, this should have been my first interview because I really believe it's a huge inspiration behind me creating this podcast. Like, I read it and I taught it as an elementary social studies class, and I really think it corrupted me because now in a good way, because now I'm always like it gave me so much agency around the work that I do. Like everything I'm do after I read this book, I think my mind was like everything I do is gonna really, really be about communities of color. And that's just what it's gonna be. And if it ain't about that, I don't want to, I don't really want to do it. I'm like, this should have been my very first interview. But we love you, April Baker Bell. Thank you. She was my first interview.
April's great too. April's great too.
Yes, yes, yes. But I think I started to think about, after reading this book, be more mindful of the distinctions between different groups than I was before among communities of color, and be more thoughtful about that. And even though you don't write this about ethnic studies, but I think it was a good intro, got me into on the track of ethnic studies. So yeah, so how y'all doing first? I'm sorry, I just had to get that out because I just got so excited. But how are you all?
I guess I can start. I'm doing really well. We're finishing up the quarter here, and I fly out tomorrow, so I am excited, but also anticipating what is now flying in the United States. It's a little bit challenging, so yeah, we'll be doing that, but all is good.
Yeah, we're doing okay here. I'm not teaching this quarter, otherwise I'd be finishing up the quarter too, just like Lola. But overall, can't complain. Just had the quarter to write and got the new edition of Unequal by Design wrapped up. So just waiting on cover stuff and blurs, and that was good to
Nice.
and interesting to do. There's a whole other conversation we're having about revisiting a second edition of a book and after so much time and what it means. But so I'm just happy to have that like done. That was my goal this quarter, was to get that done. So I feel good about that for sure.
We get to get a new writing project from you?
Yeah.
Yes, I want you to keep that in mind when I ask you a question, one of my last questions.
Okay.
So I already like geeked out a bit about so many ways that this book and your work, I shouldn't just say this book but your work has really shaped my thinking and my career and the courses I designed. Like I taught a course, Ethnic Studies and the Learning Sciences, that I made, and this was a key book to make us think about, even though you wouldn't but I just think it's just so many affordances of the book. So I'm gonna jump right into my questions. But listen, this is a conversation. Interrupt me if we lovingly interrupt each other out of love. If you wanna just interject or say whatever, and we can let this go wherever we want it to go. So don't feel like we have to get through my little questions, but these are just my little questions. Okay, so first I want to ask, okay, so one of the big notions that I think that you start out the book, and it's all throughout the book, but is that, letting folks know and reminding ourselves, even as people of color, that communities of color have always considered and struggled over curriculum. And I think I wrote that line and cited you in my dissertation because I just think that point gets so lost. Even how people understand school integration, even how people look at what's happening now, and how because of social media we see in the recent events we see a lot of families of color, homeschooling their children or protesting things that are happening in school. But one of the main things of this book is like, we've been doing this. Like, you just don't know about it, but we've always done this work. We've always fought and considered and thought about what the way we wanted our children to be educated. And it was steeped in our histories and all of that. So here at the Evolving Education Project, which I said is highly influenced by this book, one of our blurbs about what we do, we could say it's a generative space where conversations and learning around the education of children of color, youth of color, and people of color are actually shaped by the perspectives and knowledges of people of color collectively and or among distinct groups. As we learn with and from people of color, we co-construct knowledge in ways that honor and revive the knowledge production and knowledge dissemination practices of our ancestors. So with all of this in terms of knowledge and knowledge production and just our knowledges in general as communities of color, how do you see this book or even your work that you do all the time, but doing that work?
So, kind of revisiting the book, I was thinking about it in the terrain of what we have today, what's going on in K through 12 schools and higher ed, right? University of Florida and what's going on there. But just to think about the pendulum swinging back and forth, right? And it's kind of coming back for us again, like anything race having to do with actually communities that have been targeted by white supremacy, right? Were swept up under the kind of the anti-CRT critical race theory hysteria, right? That's out there. So I think part of what this text does is it kind of reminds us of how different communities have over time resisted this erasure, right? I think we start the book talking about kind of drawing from Du Bois and his idea of a peculiar sensation, right? About how we're kind of often left out of these narratives, yet we're so central to the narratives of the United States. And it's not peculiar in the sense, but I think in the political sense, right? It's like, here we are again, right? Our stories being erased. But yet it also is not a surprise. I think this book is actually important in that way, in reminding us of what the limits of a multicultural democracy, capitalist, racial capitalist democracy are. So I think in that sense, as an educator, I educate in the racial realist way, right? As a following Derek Bell. So I think this book really offers us a grounding for understanding why that happens.
Yeah, and I think that goes really, to the bones of the book, the origins of it, really, which actually originally started with an article that our other co-author Anthony Brown and I worked on, as we were just both doing. It actually started a conversation at a conference when we were both teaching curriculum studies courses and using some of the same readers as like the Thornton whatever reader and both of us were like, yeah, but we're like, what are you using to supplement all the foundation stuff of the curriculum field, because this is all the same white people in universities, and so it really came from that spirit of there's something that's been like the reality of the situation is just that, and this even also just speaks to the broader politics of knowledge, right? Like all the official knowledge production around curriculum and schooling has come out of universities, and which we know are really white settled colonial spaces. And so for us, then the book really sort of stemmed out of so what would it mean to sort of pose this question around understanding this history and sort of understanding what our peoples have been doing around education at the same time period, but trying to move away from sort of the white gaze in doing that, right? And so I think it really speaks to your point, and even your original point when you talked about think about this relative to ethnic studies, right? In a way, it's doing that same work that ethnic studies seeks to do. Just we're doing it in a little bit more academic space, but it's sort of trying to sort of recover and synthesize and put together these histories that are just a little more from a decolonial gaze and moving away from a white centered space.
So, we have a lot of different listeners, and I love these academics because these are academics who are also in community spaces, so they know like different audiences. And so, for our listeners, what is considered official knowledge in education? And then, why do we need to reclaim it?
And I'm going to introduce Wayne on that one because you come from the legacy direct of that idea of official knowledge. So that's pretty cool here because we're also talking about genealogies of practice and mentoring.
Yeah, thanks, Lola. My PhD advisor was Michael Apple at UW-Madison, and he has a book called Official Knowledge, right? That's part of his whole theoretical trajectory. And really, official knowledge is like a name for what educators experience every day, and really we all experience every day, whether you're inside schools or outside schools, right? Official knowledge is that knowledge that is sanctioned and passed down by the state in some cases, like through like standards and that kind of stuff. But it's also what's been sort of etched into textbooks, right? Put together by McGraw-Hill and the big textbook companies, and so it becomes essentially the sort of the official politics as well, because all the knowledge that's put in these spaces, it has perspective, it has politics, it's got if I want to use a more neutral term, it would be bias, but it brings with it the histories of racism and sexism and colonization and stuff, like all that gets embedded in these spaces of official knowledge. And so and then what teachers have to do is they have to contend with, like, okay, to what degree am I going to like take this official knowledge on face value, or am I going to work with my students to challenge this? It becomes sort of a decision-making point for teachers, how they interact with official knowledge.
Thinking about the official knowledge and how we fight through that, and what you were saying, Lola, before about how the moment that we're in, where anything you say that's remotely related to race or anything is considered critical race theory, and we're getting a lot of pushback. And I just wanted to say that this book is so powerful for me is because you have a pretty comprehensive history of where we've been here before, and we've fought through this before, and we've always been doing this work. So this is not new, right? This happens, and we have models in all of our different communities, in the unique ways that we fought against this and we struggled against this. I think that's very powerful. And I think that in the same way that we need to know just our histories, like, how we talk about our histories of what happened and da-da-da-da, we need to know these histories of activism and struggle and around fighting for our children, and even looking at these different examples. And they're so connected to land. They're so connected to, it's like the intersection of each unique, like their political goals and being in this land and then back home for some groups, right? And then thinking about and language. I mean, it's all of it. It's all in there. And so how we can use these as guiding lights in the present moment that we are in, that we're fighting for, that people are really fearful, but at the same time, some people are fearful, but some people are like, so what? It's like, I think you hear, and I love that about now, so yes. Did you all want to say anything to that, or?
Sure, I can start really quickly. I think one of the figures that that resonates with me is the figure of George Sanchez that we discuss in this book, from the Southwest. But one of the things I think that's throughout the book is that people were always engaged in organizing, right? And so sometimes what we offer and it's not sexy in a way. It's like, yeah, we got to organize, right? You got to work in community and keep doing the work and moving it forward. And I think that's I have a bit of a different perspective because I teach a lot of undergraduates, and so they really want to be out there fighting on direct, like, front, like what they perceive as front lines. And I'm all like, well, they're actually, the idea of a front line has a lot of challenges, right? Like, let's disrupt that. It's multiple places, right? It's at the kitchen table, it's with the neighbor, it's with these school boards, it's in these different contexts that people's organize. And I know in Washington, wow, there's a lot going on in terms of stuff and race and ethnic studies at the state level. But I've found my greatest source of hope at the local level and working with local community, and I think that's where our hope and our joy and our futures reside, is making those connections with local communities and being able to do the work in hand. Because like with George Sanchez, I can give you the names of people like Sam KG Jr., Steve Solomon, Cynthia Wilson, and so many others that have told the story of education in this context where I'm at, which is Coast Salish territories in the Pacific Northwest. Actually, Wayne and I reside in the same region, a little bit different kinds of communities, but we're in the same kind of region. So that's been the most important part for me. And I think that's what the text drives home for us, is that even from the smallest scale communities were doing this fight. And I remember at one point in the book, I can't remember which African American organization contacted some of the work of the Mexican American organizers who had been organizing around, okay, so what does it mean to be, okay, so we're quote unquote past segregation, quote unquote, right? Because we're really not. But so what does it mean then to have schooling in a quote unquote integrated system? And so Mexican Americans had been dealing with that politics. And so you have these groups coming together. It's like, okay, you've dealt with that political idea of integration. What does that look like, right? So I thought for me that moment to me is always present for me, because I know that together and in communication with other folks, like, we have a more solid understanding of what we can do and what is possible and what we need to do.
And to add on to that, I just think that one of the points we were trying to also sort of drive home, and this was part of what, when you ground your analysis, in the communities that we're actually talking about, right, and not having it, sort of decentering the white gaze on this history, is to really sort of recognize that at every point of this history, folks of color were and are, but at the time were making active decisions that were purposeful and explicit and trying to negotiate their given sort of situations, right? And that was different for everyone for everyone in the book, right? And so, for instance, the chapter on Asian Americans really looks at how how liminal the space was for Asian Americans. They were sort of, are we here? Are we not here? Right? Are they going to kick our asses out? Right? Or are we going to get to stay? Do we want to stay? Do we want to go home?
You
Like,
better learn that language. That was the most interesting. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I was like, yo, they was like, we need you to learn this language because whenever I teach this book, I'm like, this week they like us. They want us for this. Next week they may not, and we may gotta go all the way back.
Yep.
So y'all better learn y'all language. Like, I was like, wow, that blew my mind. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's a great point you picked up on there, Tiffany, because, like, in fact, in a more recent thing I was working on, and actually talking with Anthony, our co-author, about it too, is just, in a way, that was sort of the racial contract for Asian Americans, and has been, is like, we want you until we don't want you, and then when we don't want you, we're gonna figure out how to get rid of you, right? And so then you see different Asian American communities, particularly Japanese American and Chinese American, in the book, sort of trying to make decisions about what kind of schooling we're having for our kids, but it was always fluctuating because they weren't certain about their own futures, right? Either for their own choices or for the choices of, like, white supremacy around them, right? And so, but the fact that they are centered and they're the ones sort of in the dialogue with themselves about, like, what are we going to do? How do we handle this? Really shows, the point that you were just making around this question about, like, folks were active, and all of our communities were thinking about this stuff and thinking about the politics and making decisions and trying to figure it out from their in the case of the book, from their very different sort of perspectives and standpoints and situations.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, so I know that you say So I'm gonna ask you this question. I know, and if you read the book, which you read the book, you kind of say how you all, the things that happened that made you write the book, the article, and you talked in the conference and all that. So if this question sounds like you already answered it, I'll re-ask it. So when I ask this question, so okay, so I like you, I'm sure I don't remember learning about the knowledge or curricular contributions demands of communities of color, historical figures, I'm sure, but not all like that, or in my teacher preparation programs. So why and how did you decide to write this book? Because it is a pretty comprehensive, not of every group, but like official documentation of, and I'm really asking this, maybe other people don't know this, like I don't know this, but like, is this there in curriculum studies, or is this not even in curriculum studies? Because I'm like, I don't see this, like, maybe I missed it, but I'm just like, is it just, because and is this the first time that this has been compiled in this way and officially documented in this way?
Yeah, I mean, it came out of the margins of curriculum studies, right? And so I would say it is curriculum studies. But the thing about curriculum studies, and this is what's both beautiful and also difficult about curriculum studies as sort of a subfield or field, is just that it's also curriculum studies is also everything, right? There's a curriculum to policy, there's a curriculum to culture, there's a curriculum to whatever, and so it could also be, in a way, it's also a history text, right? It's an educational history text at the same time. It's a multicultural education text at the same time. But I feel like our focus was trying to go through curriculum studies of just like, what kind of curriculum did our communities like want, for their kids, and that I think is sort of at the heart of it. But even then, I don't know. Like, I don't think the book has gotten as much love as I think it should have gotten.
Me either. Can we just pause? Can we just pause on that point? It has not. I'll be like, why is that every time I introduce this book to somebody, they be like, why is this not a required reading? Okay. That's why at the Evolving Education Project, we don't just do the latest book. We do the books that align with our philosophies and what we believe in by scholars of color that you need to be reading. Whether you don't know, like, I'm like, I just feel like this should get so, I feel like it should be on everybody's bookshelf, and just for your own self. It was so healing for me. Oh, I'm getting into my next question. Let me be quiet. Go ahead. What would you say?
It doesn't, like, I certainly didn't get that much love within the field of curriculum studies. And Lola, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. But also, I'll just say, curriculum studies is also kind of dying too, and so it may have run into a space where, like, there's less and less curriculum studies courses, and people aren't teaching curriculum studies, as much anymore. And so it may have just sort of also hit a little bit of a little bit of a dead end. So academically, that way.
Yeah, I think you see that in a lot of teacher ed programs, is there's no curriculum studies classes anymore. It gets folded into kind of a foundations catch-all, or a methods class, like social studies methods, and maybe you'll learn some curriculum studies there. But there's no real focus. That's how I started teaching it. It was part of a kind of a more cohesive, it wasn't like, or I wasn't even trained in curriculum studies. I was kind of in a race and ethnicity kind of focus. So you can start even seeing that in our own graduate training, and then how we got hired to do the work. Curriculum studies as an area starts to disappear. For sure, I agree with that. But I also think that people also, there might be a sense from those that are teaching curriculum studies, because if you think about the books, I'm thinking about the books that I had to teach and how they kind of talked about the development of curriculum. We do that in this book. But I don't think that certain people necessarily see it still in terms of the canon, right? Because there's these histories that just become this kind of heavy canon in curriculum studies. And so if folks are going to teach it, that's what they're going to teach. And so it's hard to kind of break into that white wall, or whatever you will, of the one thing that people are going to teach about that.
So why is curriculum studies dying?
That's a larger existential question. I mean, my own take is just that I think it's wrapped up in sort of the move towards the sort of neoliberal university that's really aimed at, that really sees teacher education as more vocational training and not as intellectual training.
Yes.
and every program's going to get smaller and cheaper and faster, and then who has time to be thinking about educational philosophy or the history of curriculum in this country or whatever, right? We got maybe one foundations course, methods courses, like everything's got to get stacked in, and so I feel like it's just been sort of withering, in teacher education, because really teacher education drives education programs. So.
Yeah. What's sad about that is that then how teachers engage curriculum becomes much more passive, because you're missing of that history of like, actually curriculum comes out of this really complex relationship and interaction and how communities do it. So then teachers become more passive and less community oriented in how they kind of have a relationship to curriculum. So that's actually one of the downfalls of that.
And it's funny that you say that, because I even find myself, I try to give you some curriculum studies, and I try to make you be critical literacy, even in my literacy methods courses. And I just be like, and then at the end of the semester, I still have somebody that'll be like, so if I talk about bullying, I'm critical, right? I'm like, but it's because, and you can't even really get mad at them, because you trying to cram everything in. You can't even just have enough time for the space to just help them to get what, these topics really deeply, and that's the first thing I do is like, you are intellectual. Like you are here. You're not here just to, y'all know, I'm speaking to the choir, to y'all. Y'all already know. So I'm gonna go on. But so I love, one thing that I also think about a lot every time I engage with this book, reread it, is the cultural memory and the process, the journey you went on by going on through those cultural memories, and how you gathered these histories. Like, I'm like, yo, y'all had to be, I just had this vision of y'all like in some archives in the liberal arts college, just digging up things, looking at that, like it's stuff in here, like you have to really like have some like serious primary and secondary sources to like pull this history together like this. And so I wonder about that. And a little extra, what was most surprising to you, in your research as you were gathering? I know you went through some of your own personal archives, but what was that? What was anything surprising too?
I guess I can start with that. I think part of the work is why we came together is because we're already doing a lot of that kind of cultural memory work in our own work. We're kind of very historically minded. I mean, some of us are more directly kind of historians of education, not me. But I think that drove for a lot of us, our work and how we think about the work and how we nuance it in a very kind of methodical way. I'd like to think about that. So yeah, for sure, cultural memory drives that. And I think for me, it wasn't surprising, but it was like, these are the moments that I like to use to teach about, was kind of the earlier reference that I talked about, how different communities were legally like, okay, integration is now the law. How do we go about it? So I'm always interested in how legal meaning is interpreted by communities. So I guess kind of a critical race perspective, if you can think about it from the law. I'm always interested in how communities react to racialization vis-a-vis kind of what's going on in the law at the time. Because that's really useful for me, because students have a hard time disentangling social constructions of race, right? Because they think of race as biology. But then when you look at the chapter on the Southwest, it's like, oh, but that's a nationality. And it's like, well, but that's how race is constructed differentially, but also in similar ways. And so how are communities negotiating that with different racial projects from different systems ongoing at the same time? And I think that that's, for me, what was really important for how I approach the work. And I know that my colleagues have kind of similar types of lenses and deep thinking that they do about this, because at the end of the day, we're interested in how power, right, impact communities' lives, and then how we kind of think about power. So it's always, it's not necessarily kind of me and my story, but it's about what do we know about that relationship to power and have communities have negotiated it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me also, like among the three of us, Anthony is the true history
Yeah.
of education person.
Yeah.
But he's a social studies guy, right? Social studies people do everything too, right?
Yeah.
I just taking I took the lead on the Asian American chapter, and for me, I think what was startling about that was just actually, really in many ways, like that stuff's not known widely, even within education, right? And so, um, being able to sort of be in like digging into there's individual projects, individual papers, and different pieces here and there, but a lot of it came out of Asian American studies, for instance, and not much comes through education. And I just felt like for me, it was just really like mind blowing to kind of see things and learn things like, for instance, the way that the Japanese American community sort of this whole its own institution of Japanese language schools was being built up and down the West Coast, and sort of what that meant and the issues there. Like to be able to sort of go and research and dig into that stuff, and then also even in terms of the I can't remember the name of it now. It's gonna kill me, but the archives, because there was there was like this American history project connected to the New Deal, and so it was like in the late 20s, early 30s, and folks were basically interviewing people on the street, right? And so there's interviews of South Asians in Sacramento, like one of the history people, or there's interviews of Chinese Americans in Seattle, and they're talking about their schooling experience and things that happened to them. And so just to get a chance to sort of dig into that stuff, in addition to the secondary resources, but just to sort of bring those things to life, and learning stuff about my community here in Seattle, and just getting those perspectives. That was for me. That's the nerd in me. I love those kinds of projects, and I love getting to those original documents and stuff. So with regard to that chapter, a lot just the bringing together that stuff around Asian American education was really important to me, both I think professionally, because I want the field to know that stuff, but then also personally, just for me as an Asian American and getting to sort of understand that stuff better. But again, sadly, I don't think folks know that stuff's in the book, right? I think it's and there's all sorts of reasons for that. The title doesn't necessarily lend itself the way. We can tell you all about how we had to fight about the title with the publisher and ended up losing and other stuff like that. So.
But you bring up an important point, Wayne, and that's that we had to look outside of education.
Yeah.
For most of these sources, and so that's why I think it. The challenge of thinking widely and broadly, right, and looking for different sources, because all I think of the work that we all did, right, really kind of was looking outside of quote unquote the field of education to find these sources.
What's amazing to me, especially people who have been listening, every interview that I've done, the book interview part, every author is like, you will not believe how we had to fight with the publisher. It's like these critical texts. It always was some type of fight with the publisher. And so I feel like these interviews kind of become yeah, it is for the community, and we love y'all. We so glad y'all. But for all of us as young scholars, especially normally when I do have a co-host, it's like a template for us about what it's like to publish a book and the things, the ups and downs and the battles you have to pick and choose. And I'm like, it's just amazing to me. Every interview this comes up. Or people are like, and I fought to have this picture on the cover because they were, and I'm like, whoa, wow. I'm like, no matter what. And it's almost like an example of, but we don't see that part.
Yeah.
But I think as revolutionary as the work and the text is itself, it's almost like the work that scholars of color, critical scholars of color, and scholars of color that are not necessarily all the time writing for white people, but are writing for us. And sometimes we do that, and then sometimes we write text that's for us, right? But how the fight that you all have to do to the different battles that you have to do, the time and everything like that is just so interesting to me, and it always comes up. I don't even bring it up. I never ask. It just comes up.
Because think about it. That's a critical juncture where we're having to basically intersect with, what amounts to a capitalist enterprise, right?
Yeah.
It's for whatever the press is, it doesn't matter. They're trying to they want something they can market and sell. And, even if they have good politics, or they have whatever rhetoric around whatever their publishing situation is supposed to be about. But ultimately, I mean, frankly, like, this is, I'm not trying to like dog on TC Press. For in general, it's great working with them, and I like the cover image, like that part of it was good. But we did fight about the title, and we wanted to title it, off the Du Bois phrasing around peculiar sensations. We wanted that to be the title, right? Much more poetic, much more beautiful, and and I remember the email, like literally, they're like, yeah, but anyone Googling about this stuff will not find your book. We want all the keywords to be in the title and subtitle. That's why it has that, like, yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's just not. They're literally looking at marketing is what drove that.
Yeah.
And at some point you're that close to the end of the project. You're like, all right, there's some hills we're willing to die on, some we're not. We need to get this done and get it out the door, especially on a co-authored project, because it's always more work to have more cooks in the kitchen. And so it's just like, all right, we just want to get it done. But yeah.
Tiffany and Wayne, I'm going to interject because I'd like to add to one of the things that was amazing about working with Wayne and Anthony is they invited me onto the project, and I was a more junior scholar, and they were so badass about it. I mean, and now that I've been in the academy for a long time, I just want to say how generous they were in all of the ways that they embodied what it means to be in the academy and doing this work together. So they, so while, you have this practice of working with the publishers, I think working with Wayne and Anthony in that regard was really amazing for me. And how they invited me on, and like, how it was very egalitarian. And, I've been around now, so I know that's not the necessarily typical process, but I think that's important to point out because I know this is a broad audience, but I also think Wayne and Anthony, what you all did also then for me set the stage for then how, I can work with other folks and how we think about the work. So I'm really appreciative of that.
Oh, I'm super happy to hear that, and it's just a critical thing, right? Like, how do we embody our politics in our relations, right? And
Yeah.
I've known too many scholars whose research is in one way, and then how they are with their colleagues is not aligned with the politics of their research, right? And
Yeah.
for Anthony and I both, Anthony and I are good friends, and I don't know, we just operate out of love, right? And so, Lola, we knew your work and knew what you did, and we're like, you could bring so much to this, and we needed your help too in that way too, right? Like, and so it just it just made absolute sense. So I'm so happy to hear that from you, and how
Yeah.
like, that's one of the things that it's so weird to me now to be considered, like, the whole idea of junior and senior and all that kind of stuff.
It's weird, yeah.
And now I'm full professor and I'm seen as more senior and all this. But if there's one thing we can do is like, is just like, put people on. And I want to, I mean that in a hip hop sense, right? Like, whether it's having someone be like a guest verse on your track, right? That's what it is, right? It's like bring someone into the cut, right? Like we're and do it in a way that's not power laden, and in a way that is really based on like love and care for what folks do. And I think about that too, like just from the academic side about getting asked to do reviews for tenure files and stuff, and it's almost always a critical scholar of color, and oftentimes a woman scholar of color that I'm getting asked to do, and I can't say no, because like if
Yeah.
like that's like the concrete way is like, and I feel that same kind of thing. Like we just want to got to figure out how to support each other in ways that are real and sort of live in the work. So
I'm so glad you shared that because that's just as important as the work. And we talk a lot about, maybe I just could do a good job of who I invite, because people people who get on talk about this, about ways of being, and I think that's so important. And how do we do this work in the everyday, and how do we interact? I mean, one reason why I knew Wayne is because I'm just a doc student, and he would be like, he really be talking to doc students like you a real scholar. He be listening to you, and that means a lot to be like, as a doc. I was so excited and hungry, and he really, like, just people that take you seriously and where you're at, and make you feel like you have something to contribute is important. And those are the people that, and actually it's good because you know what? Then we go and we look up your work. You know, you might want to be nice if you want people to cite you. No, no, but I think we do. So I do think like in to our benefit. So you kind of was getting into my next question, Wayne. But I'm gonna go back in one of your in your when you first started talking. But this is for both of you as people of color writing this book, going through the process of the histories and the archives, like what you said about like reading those interviews is just, I think you said, did you say Japanese Americans during the New
Oh
Day
yeah, there was
time?
South Asians getting interviewed in Cali, and yeah, up and down the West Coast, folks were just getting interviewed like on the street. So, and
I mean, to even find that and be able to have that source to analyze. So I wonder, and you can name your distinct identities and your responses, but what was, if you want, what was this process like for you in like connecting with your ancestors since, if not? If I mean, if at all, did you learn more about yourself and the history of your people? Also, did you learn more about the purpose of your work as educators of color?
Absolutely. So my background is Pueblo, Tigua, and Mexican, and from the Southwest. So, kind of reading about the historical development of how this happened in New Mexico, one of the reasons that I think we forefronted this idea of caste is because in that region, caste is so important in terms of developing not just racialized identities, but power, right? How you had access to power and land. And so for me, that idea of caste has been really important in terms of most of my career. It was enlightening to me to read about what was going on in the context of New Mexico in ways, and see, this is what's awesome about our text is depending on where you are or where you're coming from, you're going to pick up different things. So a reader from New Mexico is going to come into this text, or a reader from kind of the Southeast, the tribes, or whatever, wherever you're positioned, and is going to understand the text with a very particular kind of nuance, right? And I think Anthony's chapter does that too, with talking about the historical context of Black teachers, right? And so that for me was important, is that our identities are both historical and complex. And, as much as we can think about identity as fixed, it was interesting for me to see the shifting terrains of how that worked out as well in the text. So I know for me that was super, super important. And I discovered in the archival search some kind of story about my Pueblo side, and I cited it in there because I just came across it and I was like, oh, this is really fascinating. So for me, there was an actual like archival connection that happened as a result of this research.
That's awesome. I didn't even know that until you said that just now. That's cool. Most definitely for me, again, reflecting on, for instance, the Asian American chapter, my family, as someone who's Chinese American mixed, my Asian American side has been, connected to this country in some form for, well over at this point, over 100, 30 years or something. And so there's a long history there. And so I very much identify with like the old Chinese who came. And so getting to sort of dig into that and sort of see what that is, what that was and what that experience was like, and learning about those really struggles was really good for me. There's, if I were to rewrite it, that if we were to do another edition of that book or rewrite now, there's things I would add that I've learned since sort of this last year's rise in anti-Asian racism and other histories and stuff that came out relative to that I think would be important to think about. In part because I think what the book also shows across all the chapters is that, like, the specificities of historical context, like, just matter, like they define it for everybody, and that's a shifting context too, right? And so so for me it was really powerful just to go dig into that history and just to see that stuff. And even though for me my family came through Hawaii and we left Hawaii off just because that's a whole other thing that needs its own book. In terms of education in Hawaii, it's still like, the old Cantonese Chinese American community is still like what my family identifies with, and so it was just great to be able to have time to do that. And again, the other thing I'll add is just that it helped, I've got a piece that's out there now under review around sort of thinking about Asian American education and identity, and sort of getting us to rethink that a little bit. And the work that we did on this book helped bring me that very point you made, Tiffany, around the whole we want you here until we don't kind of attitude towards Asian Americans really shaped my thinking, and that came out of this whole process. So now I've been developing that idea more for a different understanding of the racialization of Asian Americans.
And I think that's fundamentally for me, kind of thinking back on that, because I'm also thinking about Puerto Rico, right? Like those other those interesting kinds of explorations that we could have done, and I mean, there's just so many opportunities, right, that we couldn't get to. But and you hit it on something, Wayne, and that's this idea that how we talk about race in the media becomes this kind of very simplistic way, right, that we talk about race. So then how we then our fight back against race and racism has to contend with these really unsophisticated ways, right? That's how it works, right? Of thinking about race. And so I just keep coming back, and how important it is for me, because I'm teaching in some ways some ethnic studies content, for me to teach about the racialization processes for different communities, and for students to come away with a really solid understanding of that has just become much more of a vital enterprise for me. And this book cemented it for me, and it's a pathway that I'm really committed to, and that's this kind of like liberation for all of us, right? Because it really is clear to me. I mean, maybe not that it wasn't before, but that it is tied up, and that though there can be distinct differences. The path forward, I think. I'm always learning new things when I read quote unquote histories that aren't mine, and I say that because sometimes that's not necessarily true, that those histories aren't ours, right? They're shared histories, and when you dig into your background, you might be surprised that some of those histories you're tied to that history, right? And so I just have a much more, I don't know how I would describe it, but I'll end it there. But I think that it's super important.
And you all answered my question I was going to ask about why was it necessary to write, to dedicate chapters to groups instead of, you could have written this thematically, right? You could have and tried to, but and you all answered that, and I think that's so important. That's what I appreciate, and I agree with you. That's my same. I think I even have this on our website a little bit about how we talk about communities of color, but we also attend to the unique, distinct. And I think this book showed me how important that is in those histories. So I'm going to ask you one more question. Okay, so I'm a merge too, whichever way you want to go. Okay, so how do you hope teachers, community workers, and activists will use your books? And you state that you let us know right in the beginning, like this is an unfinished project, as there are many more curricular discourses and histories that are yet to be told. So what's next? Whichever way you want to go, I just try to squeeze into it,
Let's see. In terms of how folks in terms of folks picking up the book, right? I just think it's critical for all of us to understand each other, and I mean that in a broad sense. And so I think it's important for everyone to know what's the history that's contained in this, no matter what communities you identify with or come from, because one of the important pieces that this book does, and in ways it's a minute ahead of its time too, I think, if I can be so bold, is the book really centers white supremacy, right? And was using that language very openly, and so that doing that in a way helps, even though we're talking, it's distinct communities and distinct histories, we can see this sort of there's a unity in this, in white supremacy being this system that all these communities were being impacted. So I think it's important folks to see that as a form of intersection, not as a romantic intersection, but just in terms of we're all hugging each other because we're fighting white supremacy.
And for solidarity, to point us back to, instead of fighting each other, this book really points us back to it's not about us competing with each other for this, but pointing back to, sorry to interrupt, but that's what I love.
That's a reflection of our politics. I think it's a reflection of how we work together as a trio, and how we treat like that's part of who we are, and I think how we sort of see the world too, right? And so that's very astute for you to put it that way, Tiffany, because I think that's part of that's just how we wrote the book. We want it to be like that for sure.
Yeah. Man, I don't have much more to add to that, but I think, yeah, that is the power of it, right? And what's nice about this text is this is why I think it was ahead of its time too, because like, for instance, I can read Manu Karuka's Continental Imperialism alongside any of these chapters. I can read Glenn Coulthart's Red Skin, White Masks along any of these. And that's how I've been using it in my classes. Like, I introduce theory and I can update whatever theory it is, and I can use this text alongside it, and we can read it alongside that, because it's so grounded in the historical experiences of communities, but it also points the way of how communities have persevered and the work that they've done. And so, and the authors that I point to are all interested in movements of solidarity. So I'm actually I center very kind of explicitly kind of authors that are interested in solidarity as an endpoint, right? And kind of what liberation looks outside of racial capitalist, white supremacist context. So I'm very, very clear on that. And this text does a great job of making concrete what that looks like.
Okay, well, we can't wait to see what's next, because y'all said this is an unfinished project. So so we are hopeful to see what's next along this. Thank you so much for this work. Thank you for really this book just changing, being so influential in my trajectory. I think the podcast exists because of this book. Like, I'm just so thankful, and I'm going to encourage everyone to read this book. You will learn, you will heal, I'm just going to assume you will heal, but it's just so powerful, especially for people of color, that we have always been doing this work. So, okay. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
thank
for
you
having us
here. I am so grateful for the book, Reclaiming the Multicultural Roots of U.S. Curriculum, Communities of Color and Official Knowledge in Education, because it lit a fire under me and gave me an overall focus of my work. Please show this book the love and respect it deserves. Read it and use it to educate others. It truly spans across subject areas and beyond academic purposes. It's especially important in today's U.S. political climate because, as Dolores or Lola said, this book reminds us of the limits of what a multicultural, capitalist democracy offers us, even as we take seriously the current threat to democracy. Thank you for listening to part 2 of our Honoring Communities of Color Knowledges and Cultural Practices series. If something from this episode resonates with you, please share it with others and let us know through our website, evolvingeducationproject.com. Be sure to tune in for part 3 next Wednesday. Trust, you do not want to miss it. To find out more about the Evolving Education Project, to write in, or to join our listserv, check us out at evolvingeducationproject.com. And please subscribe to this podcast and follow us on Instagram, X, and Facebook. If you can only choose one, please follow us on Instagram and love all of our posts. Support that doesn't cost a dime. If you've been enjoying our podcast, you can also support us by writing a review. Favorable reviews help more educators, organizers, families, communities, and activists find us. We hope to continue to cultivate an authentic audience and community. We want you to help us to evolve over time and shape what this could be. Now that you know what we're about, let us know what you want to learn more about, authors that you would like us to interview, discussions you would like to have. Okay, that's all for now, good people. Tune in next Wednesday for a new episode. We out.